Welcome back, I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Online, the Designs Dissected series, where I use two of my previous designs, submit them to our AI DesignEye and let it tell me what it likes and what it thinks I could improve in terms of the principles and elements of design on which we are generally judged during competition. This week we have two designs, as you can see, Orchids by the Sea, which was from a national orchid convention here in Australia, and it was placed first in the class, and New Visions, which was from an online national convention as well during COVID times, and it was awarded a highly commended prize as a contemporary design. So let's look first of all at New Visions. Our first design is New Visions, and this was designed for the Australian Convention in 2021, which was held online due to obvious reasons in those years. This was designed, I designed it at home, put it together at home, and then we had to submit an image, and that was judged based on the image that was submitted. Looking at it now, I can see how much I have improved in terms of taking photos of designs that are going to be judged that way. It was very difficult for me to get the right light, as you can see, without getting the shadow, and I found that this was probably the best of the images that I took, and this is the one it was judged on, and it was well received. It was awarded a highly commended because of the innovative use that I had made of the plant material. So what I've done here, it's a timber base, just a plain block of pine, and I've drilled some holes, put in the stems from Xanthorrhea, which is commonly here called a black boy, and that's both the uprights are those. One has the flower cut half off just to give me different levels, and the arms on those two uprights also are part of the stems from that plant material. Within both the uprights and the arms, I have drilled some holes, and I've put either timber skewers or vials so that I can support plant material, and I've used repeating patterns of plant material, as you can see. So kangaroo paw, woolly bush, gum nuts threaded onto a skewer, and pine cones, and a little bit of Banksia foliage to give it a better colour. The ends of the horizontal arms also have gum nuts on them to cover up the cut ends, and in the centre between the two I've got 3 leaves from the Strelitzia, and they have been trimmed so that they give me some nice angles and shapes, and they're placed on skewers into the base, the wooden base. The design itself, when I look at it now, I'm happy. It was contemporary. I wanted it to be something that was looking forward. The title New Visions, it, to me, meant that we had to be doing things that we would never have thought of doing before. And so this was my new vision for design of the future, minimalist, which I like, but incorporating some different ways of showcasing plant material. So having submitted it to DesignEye, let's now see what it's got to say. Looking at line, first of all, the design prominently features strong vertical and horizontal lines created by the wooden sticks. These lines are crucial in defining the structure and guiding the viewer's eye through the arrangement. Well, that's good, because I wanted it not just to be a dominant structure, which it could well have been, but for you to still feel that it was a design that you looked through and looked around. The shapes in this design are mostly linear and geometric, particularly the rectangles formed by the intersecting sticks. The organic shapes of the leaves, pine cones, and other natural elements contrast with the linear framework, adding visual interest. Interesting that it's picked out rectangles. I hadn't seen it until I've read this now, and that's obviously its interpretation. So filling in the negative space, so filling in the blanks where I haven't got lines, and it's formed these repetitive rectangular shapes, and then having the organic shapes in the middle. I think the leaves make a big difference to it. I think it would be very flat and too structured without those organic shapes of the leaves in the centre. The form of the design is open and airy, allowing space between the elements, which helps in creating a sense of lightness and transparency. I have to admit that I didn't think much about form when I was doing this design. not of the overall form. I certainly thought about the forms of the plant material, and I wanted to make sure that I had different forms within the plant material itself. But it's interesting for me to read that comment and to think about how I think about designs, and whether I think about the overall form of the design or whether I'm still stuck in thinking about the form of the plant material that's going into the design. So, as always, I admit that this is a learning experience for me. This is part of my education, is having these designs analysed so that I can look at them again with a different eye. There is a variety of textures present, including the roughness of the wooden sticks, the smoothness of the leaves, and the spiky texture of the pine cones. This combination of textures adds tactile quality to the design. There's actually even more textures that you just can't see it in this image. And I'm glad that at least there was enough difference for AI to pick up the textural differences in this, as there must have been when the human judges were looking at it at the time. The colour palette is earthy and subdued, with browns, greens, and the occasional pop of red from the small flowers. So that's the kangaroo paw. This natural colour scheme contributes to a harmonious and calming effect. I don't find it calming particularly. I wouldn't have said it was a calm design. I wanted it to be a confronting design. So it's, that probably means that I've made the colour palette too harmonious, too subdued, as it said. And so what I needed to do to enhance that confrontational approach with the new vision was to bring in some brighter colours, but we'll see what it says a bit later on. The design uses space effectively, with ample negative space around the elements. This prevents the composition from feeling crowded and allows each component to stand out. And that's very true, and I'm very much a proponent of using negative space and ensuring that negative space is used in your designs to enhance your design, being able to recognize the negative space and what it's doing for your design. If you just look at the center where the leaves are, all of that space around them, because it's still framed by the two vertical lines, makes it, that whole section there, part of the design. It's not just the leaves, it's that whole area becomes part of the design. So the negative space becomes part of the design, as it does between the smaller placements, the uprights and the horizontal placements. The design is asymmetrically balanced. The heavier visual weight on the right side, due to the larger pine cone and denser arrangements of the elements, is counterbalanced by the taller vertical line on the left. This creates a dynamic and interesting balance. That very much what I had hoped was the case, because I knew having those different levels and then the opportunity of having different number of placements on each of the arms was going to challenge me in terms of balance. So I'm glad that it does appear balanced. I think it does when you look at it, but it's always interesting, as I say, to get that independent viewpoint. Contrast is achieved through the different textures and the interplay between the natural elements and the geometric framework. The contrast between the vertical and horizontal lines also adds visual tension. This is what I wanted. I wanted the visual tension. That was my challenge for new visions and for a contemporary design, was to challenge the way we think about our designs, what we use in our designs, and how they should be portrayed. So not just the perfect, picture perfect arrangement of flowers and foliage, but to actually look at nature and see what nature is telling us about how it utilises its own product to create something interesting for us to look at. Emphasis is subtly placed on the central leaves and the pine cones, which are larger and more visually prominent than the other elements. The viewer's eye is naturally drawn to these focal points. That's very true. I wanted it to be, I probably didn't want the pine cones to be as dominant as they are. I would like them to, maybe I should have shaved them down a bit. I would like them to have been about the same size as the other placements on the horizontal arms. However, having said that now, I remember that there was a problem with weight, physical weight distribution, and I needed those pine cones there, that size, to keep the weight right in terms of the horizontal arms. So that was another consideration. So the alternative is that you find something that is heavier physically and not as visually heavy to place in those corner positions. Well, there you go. Through the wonders of modern technology, I was able to stop the recording before I coughed you into deafness. So let's go back over rhythm again. Rhythm is created by the repetition of the wooden sticks and the placement of the natural elements along these lines. The eye moves rhythmically across the design, following the lines and exploring the details. Very much what I was hoping to get out of this. I knew that the repetition of those shapes and the placements was going to give it rhythm, but that doesn't always mean that your eye moves through a design. You can see that there's a rhythm there and there's repetition, but there might be stopping points. And I guess the main stopping points in this one might have been the leaves in the central part, but because they're going in different directions, it gives you that visual movement, so you move from one side of the design to the other. The design is unified by the consistent use of natural materials and a cohesive colour palette. The repeated use of similar elements as sticks, leaves and cones also contributes to the unity of the composition. And that's very rewarding because I did want it to look unified. That was part of my vision, was that we, at the moment, moving into a design phase where everything looks the same. So there's a school of design where it's all upright placements and they're all very much the same. And to me, they look messy. They don't look unified, and so I wanted to bring a little bit more structure into my design and just make a statement about it being unified but structured as well. Proportion is carefully considered in this design. The sizes of the elements are well matched, and the height of the vertical lines complements the width of the horizontal lines, creating a balanced and proportionate composition. This was very much something that I focused on in the planning. I really was very careful about the dimensions of the design and where the placements were going to be, and drilling the holes and measuring twice and cutting once. And in the website, you'll actually see the stages that I went through of building it and what I was measuring and what I was checking at that time. So if you're interested in how it came together, you can go to the website and just under the design section, new visions, you'll see a post that talks all about the stages of putting the design together. So now we move on to suggestions from AI, from DesignEye, about what could be changed in the design. And we bear in mind when we look at these suggestions that it doesn't know what this design was for, or my thinking in terms of putting it together. So it's looking at it purely as a design based on the class title, New Visions, and what it would suggest if we were to redo this design again. So often there are suggestions in there that I hadn't thought about, that I would consider, that are worthwhile considering for any design that you're doing. So let's have a look at what it said here. Enhance the depth. Consider placing some elements further back or forward within the frame to create layers. For example, adding a smaller branch or flower positioned closer to the viewer could add depth. That's very true, and because this was a design that was based on an image, judged on an image, I wasn't so concerned about depth, I have to say, and there is really no depth to this design. So that would be, had it been a physical judging, I would have to consider doing something about the depth of the design. And what I would probably do is have a mirror image, so I have two of the same design back to back, so that it gave it depth and it gave it a mirror of the design that you're seeing from the front. Vary the height. Adjust the height of the vertical lines so that they are not all aligned, creating a more dynamic arrangement. And that's probably something that I could have considered on where the vertical placements are on the horizontal arms. To have them up and down a little bit more would have created a little bit of movement in the design. I don't know that it would have reinforced this structural element that I wanted to highlight in this particular design for this particular competition. Introduce a focal point, add a large brightly coloured flower or an unusual element to draw the viewer's eye to a specific area. Now, this was something that I had considered. I had considered putting the Strelitzia flowers in that central part, but when I tried it out, they looked wrong. They were the wrong angles, they were the wrong colour. They just detracted too much from the It just looked like it was a design in the middle of two arms. It didn't look like it was a complete design the way this one does, because the leaves help you move around the design. Play with colour. Incorporate small colourful flowers or leaves to add pops of colour that contrast with the natural browns and greens. Yes, that's something that I would consider next time around. I would have things that were more obviously coloured in all of those placements, both the horizontal and the vertical placements. Experiment with the base design. Wrap the base in a textured material or add small natural elements like moss or stones to integrate it more fully into the design. And that's a really good suggestion. It's something that I should have done. I think the moss is probably the better suggestion out of all of those things, because it reflects the green colour of the leaves. I think anything else is going to be a little bit too hard textures, so hessian or bark or the stones even, I think, would be too hard a texture and too hard a form to blend well into the design. But I would certainly consider the moss. So there we have our feedback for new visions. Let's now move on to our second design, which is Orchids by the Sea. Orchids by the Sea is our second design. This was for a orchid convention. So they were very much talking about the plants and the specimens, and the floral art section was an added attraction for the people who were there. This one were actually placed first in this competition, and as you can see, I've used a palm spathe as the base, upturned, screwed to a piece of driftwood, and inside the spathe itself I've just used shells filled with wet sand as the water source for the orchids and the monstera leaves. And I've surrounded them with seaweed because that's a plant material, so it counts in these competitions. And at the top of the spathe, just a little bit of dried seagrass to mask the cut top of that spathe. Kept it very minimal, as is my way, but also because I wanted to highlight the orchids. I didn't want to have any other floral plant material in the design. And I think that that's why the judges favoured it, apart from the fact that it met the class title as well, because you get the idea of the sea with the seaweed and the shells. But I think the palm spathe also gives you a sense of a wave crashing over. And the only leaves, the monstera leaves, look like they might be something that you'd find close to the sea, if not beside the sea, shall we say. So let's now see what DesignEye has got to say about this design. Starting with line, as we always do, the design utilises both curved and straight lines. The most dominant line is the curved line created by the palm spathe structure, which helps to convey a sense of movement and fluidity. The vertical lines from the plant stems contrast with the curvature, providing balance and structure. And that's interesting because I have to say I didn't really think about the vertical lines from the plant stems. I was trying to get it all completely curved rather than have any straight vertical lines or obvious vertical lines. So it's an interesting bit of feedback for me to remember that I need to look at these designs when they're finished and not see just what I wanted it to be doing, but rather what it's actually showing me. The primary shapes in this design are organic, particularly the large monstera leaves and the natural irregular shape of the driftwood. The roundness of the palm spathe contrasts with the spikier textures of the dried materials, adding visual interest, which is good. The shape of itself, the shape really was determined by the palm spathe, and I knew that that was going to give me the line that I wanted, and obviously the shape that I wanted, and then I just had to think about the materials that I was going to use that would re-emphasize those two areas of design that I had determined were important for this particular class. The form is three-dimensional with a strong sense of depth created by the layering of the leaves, flowers and driftwood. The use of both horizontal and vertical planes helps to create a full, robust composition. This is also enhanced, let me say, by the fact that I haven't placed it, or by the way I've placed it on the bench, shall we say, so diagonal to where the judge would be standing. So it emphasises the depth of the design, because there is depth in the design, but it gives it even more depth by placing it that way. But it also showcases the fact that you can look in and through the design and see the different forms of the materials that have been used. A variety of textures are present, from the smooth glossy surface of the monstera leaves to the rough rugged texture of the driftwood and dried materials. This textural diversity adds richness and complexity to the design. Very much a focus for me is the textural contrast in a design. I think it's too easy for us to just pick plant material regardless of what it is because it's our favourite and not think about the textures that we're exhibiting in a design, because often the contrast in a design, the easiest way to do a contrast in a design is with the textures, because there are so many textures available to us through plant material. The colour palette is predominantly natural with greens, browns and yellows. The bright yellow orchids provide a pop of colour that draws the eye, creating a focal point amidst the more subdued tones, which obviously is what I wanted for an orchid show. I wanted the orchids to be the star of the show. I am a bit concerned looking at it now that the monstera leaves dominate a little bit in terms of the visual presence, but I think in real life the yellow of the orchids was so bright that it actually stood out against the green even better than it would have otherwise had I massed them even more so, or used bigger ones even. Space is well utilised with the design, filling the palm space without feeling overcrowded. There is a good balance of positive and negative space, allowing the individual elements to stand out while still contributing to the overall composition. It's interesting, I don't see a whole lot of negative space in this design. I guess when you are looking through the design, you'll see a little bit more, and there's the space in between the monstera leaves, that sort of thing. So I'm pleased with that analysis, but it does, once again, it reminds me to look at these designs with my analytical eye, not my designer eye, when I finish putting the design together before it's judged. The design is asymmetrically balanced, with the heavier visual weight on one side where the larger monstera leaves are and the bulk of the floral material are placed. This is balanced by the lighter, more open structure to the opposite side, preventing the design from feeling too heavy or lopsided. So yeah, I think that probably what it means is that because the palm spathe extends out, so you move past that heavy visual area there because there's something else to look at. And so there is balance in that sense. Probably something I did need to look at a little bit more carefully. I don't think it's quite as well visually balanced as it could be. Contrast is effectively employed through use of different textures, smooth versus rough, shapes, curved versus straight, and colours, bright yellow orchids versus dark driftwood. This contrast adds visual interest and prevents the design from feeling monotonous. I'm glad that that's the case. As I said earlier, contrast to me often comes via the textures, but I can see now that the shapes, there's a little bit of contrast in the shapes, although mostly to me it's curved shapes. There's not a whole lot of straight lines. Obviously it's seeing something different in the photo than I am. And I can see that there is a colour contrast as well, which is good, and that purely down to the bright yellow of those orchids. Emphasis is placed on the yellow orchids, which stand out due to their bright colour and central placement. The orchids naturally draw the viewer's eye, serving as the focal point of the design. That's what I wanted. It was an orchid show. By rights, if you've got orchids in the title and orchids is the first word, then that's the thing that should stand out in your design, and the rest of it provides the framework for where the judge is going to see the orchids. And I think it's part of it is some respect to the hosts of the competition that you've been invited to participate in, is that you acknowledge their special interest, so orchids in this case, by making them the hero of your designs. Rhythm is created through the repetition of the curved lines and the placement of the orchids along the curvature of the palm spathe. The viewer's eye is guided along these lines, moving naturally from one element to the next. That's good. I think often with a design that uses that curvilinear emphasis, it's easier to get the rhythm because you're following that line, and so it provides you with movement and with rhythm. But you do have to do the repetition, because had I had that curvilinear line and not had the placements as evenly matched as I could have, then there wouldn't have been rhythm. You might have stopped somewhere in the design is basically what I'm saying. So you would have followed the design and then come to a stopping point. So with this, the rhythm is there because you continue to look around the design. The design is unified by the consistent use of natural materials and a cohesive colour scheme. The combination of organic elements in the palm spathe creates a harmonious composition that evokes a sense of the sea and nature. And that's, as I said, that's what I wanted. I wanted the palm spathe to be the thing that made you think about the seaside, and then the elements that were in it were almost gathered together, blown into the palm spathe, if you think of it that way. And so they were unified in that your brain tells you that, yes, you would all find all of those things together anyway. So it's a unified design. There's nothing there that you wouldn't find necessarily near the sea or close to the sea. Proportion is well maintained, with the size of the monstera leaves, orchids and driftwood all fitting within the palm spathes. The scale of the elements relative to the container and to each other creates a balanced and proportionate design. And you will recall, if you looked at any of the other videos, that this is something that I have talked about a lot, is scale and proportion, because it's so easy, and it would have been easy with these orchids because they were very small, to have them lost in the design. And I've talked previously about massing small flowers together so that you do get a sense of scale and of proportion within your design. But what worked for me in this case, I have put some together, but I haven't massed them as a big clump. It's the colour that means that they stand out. And so the scale of them is not as important because you're still drawn to them because of the colour that they are. So let's now see what the suggestions are from DesignEye to do some things with this design. Enhance the focal point, add a few more orchids or a complementary coloured flower, a soft blue or white, to increase the visual impact of the focal point. That's probably very true. I think I should have looked at a couple of other colours in the orchids, probably not the white, because then you run the risk of that being the draw card. I think the blue and the yellow would have worked well together, and I know that I think in this design we were allowed to use coloured flowers, so I could have used a blue coloured orchid, the lighter blue colour, not the awful dark blue that you can get. Incorporate vertical elements. Introduce tall grasses or slender branches to draw the eye upward and add height to the composition. Once again, a very good suggestion. I could have used some seaside grasses to bring your eye up from the monstera leaves up to the top where I've got the dried seaweed at the top, and incorporated that a little bit more into the design. Vary texture. Consider adding a smooth reflective element like a polished stone or a shiny leaf to contrast with the rough textures. So it acknowledged that the monstera leaves were shiny and smooth, but something that was shinier still. So perhaps the polished stone somewhere, just one or two tucked in, because once again, they're things that you might find beside the sea. What I could also have used, now that I think about it, was some sea glass. So just bits of glass that you find on the beach or by the sea, and I could have tucked a few of those in, not so that they are dominating the design, but they add that element, not just of texture, but reinforce the interpretation of the design. Refine the colour palette, integrate a few elements in soft blue or teal to reinforce the sea theme and to add colour depth. So I think we've talked about that already. I think the blue is probably a good idea, the soft blue. And the teal could probably come from that glass. You know, if I found some glass around that I could tuck into it somewhere, just little bits. Play with negative space. Reposition some of the elements to create more deliberate negative space, allowing the design to breathe and emphasising the main components. And this was something you would have heard me react to earlier in there. I do think it needs more negative space. I think it is a little bit too constrained in that centre area, and so I would look at spreading out the monstera leaves more, or having one monstera leaf and some of the grasses like it talked about earlier, or some of the longer stems of seaweed that I could have put up to the top of the palm spathe. So there we have our two designs for this week, New Visions and Orchids by the Sea. As always, I encourage you to submit your own designs by going to the website and uploading an image, and within 24 hours you'll have your results back. Along these lines, someone, a human judge, does review them before they go out to you, just to make sure that it makes sense, that it's explained well enough that you will understand what it's trying to say, and that the suggestions aren't too outlandish for what it might be suggesting. It's a way of looking back at our designs. As you can see with this series that I've been doing, these are designs that I put a lot of effort into, and some got results, some didn't, but there's always things you can do, and there's always things you can learn. So it's a great way and an easy way to review your designs without having to worry about going to another competition or trying to rethink, looking at an image of the design and trying to rethink what you could have done better. This is someone on your shoulder saying, well, try this, try that. So give it a go. And in the meantime, I will leave you to think about those suggestions that have been made here. For these designs, I'm Kim Bailey. This is Floral Art Online, the Designs Dissected series.